Welcome back in, guys, for another weekly weather update every Sunday here. And this week, we're talking about the tropics. They've been very quiet this season, but it looks like things are heating up. We're talking about the potential for a storm to impact the U.S., but we'll get into why there's still a lot of uncertainty there. And we're also talking about, now that it's meteorological fall, the return of fall weather. And it's going to be big time for much of the U.S. So as the month of September begins, there's a lot of changes and a lot to go over as we take a look at this week of weather. As I mentioned a moment ago, we have tropics which are heating up. So we're going to go there first and take a look at what the headliners may be as we move through this week and especially into the next week of weather. So let's take a look at what's going on right now, and this is from the National Hurricane Center. We actually have one area of potential development, low development chance, but out here already in the Gulf, this is going to be a bigger player in our weather, whether it develops or not. So we're going to come back to this. But the biggest player in the tropics right now is actually this guy, which you're seeing over the next 2 days, which basically takes us into the start of the week. Only a 10% chance of development. Now, it doesn't look like much, but if we switch to our 7-day outlook, this gives us an idea of what we're looking at over the next, week here. And throughout this week, this has a much greater chance at development, and what we're seeing here is something closer to a 40% chance. Now, this is big because it tells us that not only is it going to be trending upwards, but more importantly, the direction at which this is headed takes it much, much closer to the U.S. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty with this storm, but what I can say is that if we could make this a 10-day instead of 7-day development zone, or outlook, we may be talking about something much higher than just a 40% chance. Everything I've seen would suggest that we're likely, very, very likely to see that 40% chance of development go up a lot as we go through this week. But let me show you why there's uncertainty and just the wide range of people this storm could impact. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know I'm not really big on jumping straight into computer models, but we're going to do that right here. And it's more or less because I don't want to overanalyze a storm that is still a good 7 to 10 days from any significant impacts in the U.S. And this is going to change a lot, simply put. So let's just get an idea of the range of outcomes. And this is the best way to show you. Now, what I want you to look at is right here. That's actually our storm system. And what we're going to be looking at is the American ensemble members here. What each one of those red numbers indicates there is the strength of a storm, which we're not even going to worry about yet. But more importantly, the position of the storm as it moves over time. It's going to give us a bunch of different outcomes, and it'll give us an idea, basically, of the total range of outcomes. So let's put it in motion. It'll be best if you just watch it with me here. So this is Sunday. We're going to move it into Monday, and you can kind of see, we're actually moving into Tuesday. You can kind of see those numbers beginning to spread out a little bit. Now, not a lot, because as you might imagine, uncertainty increases with time. So we're just going to watch this cluster as it moves forward. Again, this is just Tuesday. Here's Wednesday. You can see it's still clustered very well. Thursday and into Friday as well. This is where things begin to diverge. And this is going to be a pivotal time in the forecast, because what we can see here is as it moves basically south of Cuba here, we're going to watch as there becomes a greater level of uncertainty. So we're pretty certain it is going to take a path that takes it south of Cuba. But after this, watch where those red dots begin to drift. You have a good range of them moving into the Gulf here. You can actually see a cluster, though, moving more westwards through the Gulf. And you have a cluster that's actually cutting up towards Florida. All right, so we begin to see two different paths diverge here. All right, I'm going to take out that annotation. This is Sunday, by the way. We're already into Sunday. I'm still not expecting anything huge at this point, but we'll have to watch Florida. Now, as we continue to move this forward, this is into next week. You can see that cluster that hit Florida. I mean, it kind of fades away because if it goes into Florida, it really loses time and it just doesn't develop into much, at least that's how it stands now. However, this is looking at Tuesday. If this does manage to move into the Gulf, you're beginning to see, it looks like about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different clusters still. And when you have those orange colors showing up, that suggests that this storm may have some strength to it. So if this manages to go north into the Gulf, we're looking at what could be the potential for landfall anywhere from, we'll say, Monday into, we're looking at still Thursday, and there's the last cluster beginning to make landfall there. So Monday to Thursday, not this week, but the next week is what we'd be looking at here. And again, the concern is on that Friday, what happens basically from this point if it continues to move westwards and goes into the Gulf, that's where we may have some problems. Let me show you the European model here too. We're going to take a look at this really quickly because it's going to give us the same type of thing, but it's just another solution, so it's more data that we can basically ingest into our range of possibilities. So we're going to do the same thing. See our system right here. That's our guy. We're going to watch it now as it begins to move farther west. We're going to move this all the way into Friday, and guess what? Just like we were seeing before, on Friday, this is the pivotal part of our forecast. You can see all those numbers still closely clustered. Watch what happens after this. We're going to continue now into the weekend. This is already Sunday. The Euro is a lot farther west here. Now here we are this is moving into Tuesday, the following week. We got a cluster out here beginning to move north. We have a cluster continuing to move west. This is much more west and southerly than the American model, so just something to note. And the European model also doesn't really send anything into Florida. It's suggesting we may have a stronger storm, more or less. Here we are, like I said, Tuesday, Wednesday, and into Wednesday, more or less. We have our first group of ensemble members making landfall. We kind of have some more stuff kind of dying out here in the Gulf, and maybe a straggler right there. But more or less, it's painting the same picture. If this thing moves into the Gulf, that's where we have some concern. It's likely to move into the Gulf, but if it takes this north turn, that's where the biggest problems would be. If it goes to the west, we're not seeing a lot of suggestion that it's going to continue the same level of development. And if it cuts north quickly, again, not as much development. But it is this turn on Friday. If it does manage to make that turn into the Gulf, kind of more northerly, that's where we could have problems. And we're looking at something in this general vicinity the following Monday through Thursday. I'm going to make that our entire range of possibility here. And I'm taking a look at the date too, because that's a while from now, and I should check that. Let's see, 9th through the 12th is more or less when we would be most concerned about U.S. impacts. Still a lot we don't know here, okay? This forecast is going to change. Do not overreact or panic to this, but it is good to be thinking about, okay, if there is at worst a hurricane that's making landfall in that area and you live there between the 9th and the 12th of September, just think about, how to prepare. Now you know the worst case scenario. We have a week to watch this, so stay tuned. But it's not the only concern actually for that part of the country. In fact, you remember we showed you early on that one system that's right on the Gulf right now. That is going to cause problems this week and for parts of the Gulf. So let's take a look at what that guy is going to do and how it's going to impact your weather in the short term here. I'm going to take you here to our excessive rainfall outlook as we begin the week, and this is into Monday. We have Texas, parts of the Gulf Coast, even a little bit of the East Coast here, with the potential to see some flooding rain. Now, this is an area we're going to watch, especially down here into Texas. We have that tropical system right in the shoreline here, and that's what's going to help to push a bunch of moisture onshore. Could cause some problems. We'll take a look at Monday and into Tuesday, and now here's where we have that slight risk for flash flooding, and mainly across Texas. This is going to be our main concern this week in terms of flooding. And, those areas could use some rain. It's been a very, very hot August. So September bringing some, likely wanted changes and needed changes for areas out there too. Move it into Tuesday, you can kind of see that it disappears, but only temporarily. And by the way, we've seen this pattern for a lot of August. Just some afternoon storms in portions of the mountain southwest. They could cause some very, very localized flooding. But I'm going to move this now into your Wednesday and Thursday. And this is where we have more concern. Look at that. It looks like a wave. It's like a 2 lanes logo right there, right? Green wave. That, though, is where we're going to see the potential for flooding from that tropical system, as basically throughout this entire week, it really just meanders right there and continues to push moisture into the U.S. So let's take a look at our fronts, because those are going to be huge players in creating this rain. But I also want to look at some of our areas farther north. We're not going to talk too much about those areas because the weather is changing so much. It's going to become extremely quiet, and some really favorable conditions are going to come out of this too. So a lot to look at here. Let's get into it. This is going to be fun. Okay, here are our fronts, and we're starting with Monday here. The most important thing is this cold front. So for areas, basically everything out here, that's at least half the country, mostly the plains all the way out to the northeast. This high pressure system is going to dominate the weather. It's going to keep things cool and sunny, and that's why we're not going to talk about it too much, because it's going to stay extremely sunny. But that high pressure system is a huge player in our weather, likely a bigger player than anything else this week. So had to make mention of that. But the big player for the flooding is the cold front that's being forced south by that cooler air mass aloft. This is the leading edge of that cooler air. Now, we have our system which is sitting in the Gulf. It's actually this low pressure system right here. And what that's doing is it's helping to throw moisture up at this front, and the front's sort of tripping it up. So as that moisture hits it, it's forced to rise, and then it gets dumped out as rain. It's also sort of being helped out by this system over Texas too. So that's why we're looking at a special chance for flooding in Texas and the Gulf Coast as we begin the week. But Texas especially heading into Tuesday, which we'll take a look at right now. And once again, you can see the front still right here, stretched out across the same areas. That's not moving, so it's going to keep rain chances in that area. And I'll also have to mention, this is the 1020 isobar, which basically says it's a strong high-pressure system, and it's very wide-reaching, so that's going to keep things really quiet. We'll move this into our Wednesday. You can kind of see that front beginning to slip a little farther south. That's part of the reason that Wednesday we didn't see anything on our excessive rainfall outlook. And then we get into Thursday. Now, that front is still farther south, but at this point, it's going to continue to pool moisture up here. And as it pools moisture up there, that's when we're talking about an increased chance for flooding in the southeast. We'll move this forward one more day just so you can see what else we're looking at. This is for Friday. The thing that's going to help to dry things out is actually this front here. It's going to begin to kick some of this moisture away. Although this could be a bigger player in our weather too that we'll need to keep an eye on. More or less, I would at least be watching this area for flooding on Friday as well, even though we're not seeing it yet on the excessive rainfall outlook. And then Saturday, you can kind of see we have this front really beginning to take over. And we may have some excessive rainfall to keep an eye on across a good chunk of the eastern U.S. as we head into next weekend. Again, this is Saturday and Sunday as well. This front will continue moving east, and as it moves east, it's going to take a lot of moisture along with it. Once the front gets through, this high-pressure system is really going to quiet everything down. So if you're in the north-central U.S., this upcoming weekend looks actually spectacular, if not a little chilly in some areas. We're talking about below-average temps for sure with this pattern out here. But if you are on the East Coast or in the Southeast, I would definitely have some concern about Saturday and Sunday for potential rain, and it may be heavy in some spots. So really just depends on where you are. But let's take a look again at what we're going to be tracking for those areas. And I also want to look at exactly how much rain may fall for some of those spots too. So we'll check in with our American model first here. And what you're seeing here on Monday is that rain, mainly over Texas, is just sort of sitting here. Also some more rain across the southeast. Those are two areas that we're watching. So that's Monday for you. Moving into Tuesday, many of the same spots still seeing rain, at least in Texas. That's where we have that flash flood risk at its peak, is on Tuesday. Moving into Wednesday, and look, you can still see those persistent showers. And remember, on Wednesday, that front's basically made its way all the way over the Gulf. That's why most of the rain is sitting over, where that front is. But you're going to notice out here, like I said, on Thursday, a lot of that moisture begins to pool up, and we're going to see it lift north as this next front begins to come through. You can actually see it. See where the isobars kind of stick out up there? That's your front right there. And it's going to come in out of the north and begin to push farther south and east, which is going to pull up more moisture. But let's take a look here now on Thursday. There's that rain beginning to fall more abundantly over the southeast. Moving into Friday, and here's where things get a little more interesting. There's our front, like we showed you before, and here's that moisture pooling up over the southeast. We're going to need to watch, because if these systems interact, it will make a difference on what happens this upcoming weekend. The American model here kind of saying no, they won't interact a ton, but this is still the area, like I said, regardless of exactly how this shakes out, that's the area we need to watch as we head into the weekend. There's a lot of uncertainty here. This forecast is going to change, but I'm telling you right now, think about weekend plans and how those could be impacted. Now we move this into Sunday, and you're still looking at rain chances out there. I think that the American model is doing some funky things, so I'm not putting that much stock into this. Just goes to show how much uncertainty is at play here. But let's take a look at the European model too, because It's always good to get an idea of all our possible solutions, and we're once again going to start here on Monday. There's your rain over Texas, your rain over the southeast. We're going to push this into Tuesday. Not a lot's different. European model perhaps a little bit less aggressive with rain over Texas, so just something to note there. Maybe suggesting a little bit lower a chance for flooding. Move it into Wednesday, and there's your rain. It's a bit more aggressive with rain over the southeast, especially Wednesday and Thursday. Again, we only have that marginal risk for flash flooding, but I do expect this will likely be upgraded to slight based on more agreement we're seeing. Meanwhile, here's our system sweeping in from the north and west, and what we see here heading into Friday, perhaps a little bit earlier than the American model was suggesting, but same areas. As we head into Friday, it's much of the eastern U.S. that is going to be facing the chance for rain Friday and without a doubt Saturday here too. Now it gets a little more interesting because the Euro is it's phasing them. They're interacting. They're trying to become a big storm system here. We're a long ways out. This is far from a sure bet, but the weather will be unsettled in the eastern U.S. Friday and Saturday especially as it stands now. Question marks remain with how fast that front comes in from the north. If that front comes in quicker, that makes this high-pressure system more basically the high-pressure system gets in quicker as well. So it makes it a bigger player on the weekend. It means Sunday would be a much nicer day. Again, that's something we don't know for sure right now. But what I can say for sure is Friday and Saturday, we'll need to watch the eastern U.S. And if things move along quicker, which we hope for, that means our conditions will improve much faster for Sunday. And, based on everything I've seen, even beyond what I just showed you, I am optimistic that Sunday will be a much nicer day in those areas. So we'll hope for that. But that's what I would expect right now based on everything I've seen. We can look at our total rainfall through the week too. We'll just show you this really quickly, guys. But I do want to show you what we're seeing here. Again, these numbers, I won't take them verbatim. But what you're getting at here is basically anything that's purple to red. That's 1 to 3 inches of rain. Definitely could be some flooding in Texas with that. The southeast, you have that potential for flooding out there. It's basically just saying where there's flood potential. But you can see a lot of this rain centered sort of in the south and coastal portions of the U.S. here. That's the American. We'll take a look at the European here again really quickly just to give you an idea of everything that may occur this week. And here we are by the end of the week. European, a little more of a contrast, and it has a more sharp cutoff. But you can see once again, it's the southeast and up the east coast that has the highest potential to see rainfall this week. Probably being a little aggressive with the east coast based on that run we saw. However, it gives you the big picture. Just something to keep an eye on. Now, we're going to wrap this forecast up, but I want to talk about temps because they are changing and quickly. Get ready to see some really fall-like weather in some parts of the country. If you live in the West, it might be a little bit of a different story. Now, you've seen this before if you've watched any of these videos. It's my favorite forecasting tool. Well, maybe not my favorite, but one of them. It's our 500 millibar heights. It just gives us a very broad idea of how warm or cool it's going to be in the atmosphere. Also tells us how stormy it may be too. But we're focused on temperatures here. So what really stands out, and it's not hard to see, is this ridge in the west and this trough cutting in the east. So what does that mean? Means warmer than average weather for the most part in the west this week and cooler than average weather coming in for the east. But let's put this in motion. This is Monday. You're going to see some shifting here, but as a whole, see that ridge kind of tries to build into the east, middle of the week. As a whole, we're going to see that system be stymied by what is going to be that trough, and that trough really builds in late in the week as well. So for the most part, we're looking at, again, that ridge in the west and the trough in the east. So warmer in the west, cooler in the east. Pretty simple. Let's take a look at the actual temperature anomalies, though, because I'm sure we all want to know how is that actually going to translate to our temps, and I'll show you right here. We're going to start with our Monday, though, and here are those temperature anomalies, basically telling us what's the temperature going to be relative to average. And what you can see here across the really 2/3 of the eastern U.S., if you will, is cooler than average weather on Monday. But you look off farther north and west where that ridge is, and to no surprise, we're looking at temps that may be 10 to 15 degrees above average. I don't believe we're going to see records, but it is going to be warm out there. Moving into Tuesday here, and still a very similar pattern. That warmer air trying to move farther east. Remember that ridge shifted east as well. Also, it's not going to be much colder than average anywhere in the eastern or central U.S., but it will be noticeably cooler. What you're seeing here is sort of the byproduct of wet weather. That's not necessarily the air mass. That's more so the lack of sun and evaporational cooling. Moving into Wednesday, and you can kind of see that warm air. It's trying to get in, but it really begins to wither. I'd say if you are in the central or eastern U.S., Wednesday is very likely to be the warmest day of the week for you. It seems very likely. Also, I do want to say that even though that initial burst of warmth is moving eastwards, we're going to see that warmth replenished across the western U.S., and this is out here on Wednesday. While it's not a big area, you're seeing the coastline, the Pacific coast here, 10 to 15 degrees above average. That's very notable. And we're also going to see that trough. Here's our cold air mass. Remember we saw that cold front come in? This is where it all connects. It's really interesting here. That much cooler than average weather is going to sweep in quickly here. And we're also going to see it ride up from the Gulf because of the rain. So watch what happens after Wednesday. This is where it gets interesting. Now we move it into Thursday. And Thursday we have that well above average warmth out here in the western U.S. This is where perhaps we could try to challenge some records, by the way. Basically everything out here, we're talking about temps that maybe 10 to perhaps 20 degrees above average in some of the leeward side of the mountains where you're going to get downsloping. We'll need to keep a close eye on how that plays out. Meanwhile, the eastern U.S., you begin to see those blue colors really take over as we head late into the week. Here's Friday. How about that for a signal? That's your bowl of cold air, and it's coming straight into the U.S. Meanwhile, the West stays quite warm. Finally, we'll move it into the upcoming weekend. Here we are on Saturday. There's that bowl spilling, quite literally, into the eastern U.S. Now, part of that's because there is going to be a lot of rain and clouds, but it really is a much cooler air mass. Your western U.S. staying much warmer. And as we move it into the second half of the weekend, well, it's pretty obvious here. Much, much warmer in the western half of the U.S., much, much cooler in the eastern half of the U.S. So a big divide there between our temperatures. But let's take a look what the actual temps are going to be before we wrap up the video. Now, you guys also know, if you've been following along here, that I love the NBM. Basically, it gives you a pretty broad brush of temperatures. It takes the extremes, it kind of consolidates them into a more I think reasonable forecast. I just like its accuracy, especially when you're looking more than 3 days out. So let's take a look at what we're seeing for actual temperatures. And what you can see here across much of the northeast as we begin the week are temperatures in the 70s. Those red colors, I don't know why they chose red for 70s, but they indicate temps in the 70s. The brown colors are temperatures in the 80s and 90s. And what you're going to see as we begin to move through the week are those temperatures. This is still for Monday. They're going to be pretty warm in the west. And in the east, well, not so much. Here's your Tuesday now. High temperatures in the east are going to be once again in the 70s. Central U.S. in the 70s as well. A little warmer if you're closer to the Gulf Coast, and quite hot if you were in the southwest out here. Again, we could see temperatures in the hundreds, even into the valley in California. Temps could reach 100. Most won't see it, but it gives you an idea just how warm it could be when we're even talking about a chance. On Wednesday, this is again our warmest day for much of the central and eastern U.S. And like I said, you're seeing 80s pop up for a good chunk of the area. Could be some 80s to get into the northeast also, but the heat is largely still going to be concentrated in the west here. And then we see that cooler air come in. By the way, this is heat that could be dangerous up and down the Pacific coast and into the southwest too, by the way. Now we move it into Thursday. Temperatures in the east still hanging around upper 70s, around 80 degrees. In the south, we're also looking at 70s, so a little cooler than average in the southeast due to the rain. In the west, still talking about real heat. That could be a danger. These are going to be 90s and hundreds for the most part out here, but it is going to stay contained. Friday's when we see that cooler air begin to come in here. We're taking a look now. If you look at the east, still 70s, but I mean, gosh, these are 60s and even some 50s that are spilling into the U.S. Remember that cold air mass? Here it comes. Meanwhile, we'll move this forward a little bit, and in the west, there's your heat. Becoming a little more contained here, but remember, we get that resurgence as we head into, as we head later into the week too. Just lost our place. Let's get it back here. Okay, so here's your Friday. That cooler air spilling in. Moving into Saturday, now as we talk about the weekend, you can see temperatures struggling to even reach 70 across a good chunk of the north central U.S. We're in the 80s in the southeast. That's not unusual for this time of year. We're very hot in the southwest, and as we move into the later parts of the weekend, we're still going to see this warmth persist here, whereas this colder air really takes over in the eastern U.S. So let's move it into Sunday, begin to wrap up the week here, or the weekend. And once again, you're seeing 60s across a good portion of the north-central U.S., 80s still in the southeast, and in the west, that hottest air begins to taper off a bit, but it is still going to be very warm, especially in the southwest. So you get the idea here. You're in the east, it's going to feel like fall, especially after Wednesday. You're in the west, it's going to feel like summer hasn't left, even though we've turned the chapter into meteorological fall. This week will be hot out there. Southeast also looks like it'll be a little cooler than average. So it's a tale of two seasons, just whether you're in the west or the east. Hope you enjoy whatever you're in. Now, with that, we're going to wrap things up here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you got something out of it. Key points, again, we got the tropics heating up. We got that flood potential. Temperatures really split. Summer in the west, fall in the east. I'm in the northeast. I'm in Boston. I'm kind of not really looking forward to the fall, but it is going to come with very sunny weather, so we get to enjoy that. Next weekend, I mean, that might not be so great, but we'll worry about that when we get there. In the meantime, if you like what you're seeing, like you've probably seen, I am a meteorologist. You can trust these forecasts. There's a lot of people on the internet who are putting stuff out that, frankly, I'm not certain really know what they're talking about. But what you're getting here is good information. So consider following along, and we'll be back here every Sunday with an update, taking a look at the week ahead. Hopefully, again, you're in a place where it's going to be sunny. And if not, well, hopefully you're prepared for what's ahead, and we could have helped out with that. And next weekend, be sure to tune in because we're likely going to be talking about that tropical system. I expect it's going to be a much bigger deal, and you're going to start to hear about it more, I'm sure, in the news by later this week. So we'll be on top of that. And if anything really becomes interesting before next Sunday, we'll have an update here too. But happy to have you here, and hopefully I see you next week.